one of the things that he argues in here is that the jurisprudence have turned this thing into something completely different. And they've argued that all this knowledge is simply the knowledge of argumentation and dogmatic theology. And he's very much opposed to this. And what he's trying to do is get people to recognize that you're wasting your time if you think that the knowledge that the Prophet ﷺ came to bring is the knowledge of renting and buying and selling and these things. Those things are important, and there is an element to the Sharia, but this is not what this matter is about. He's trying to take us back to the centrality of it. And then he goes on, and then he uses the example of astronomy, where he says astronomy has two branches, what's called tanjim. The mathematical astronomy, which measures the heights of stars and the movements of stars. He said those are important to learn prayer times and to be guided by and to understand the universe we're living in. But he said going too deeply into them also can become blameworthy and harmful. And he said, and astrology is certainly harmful. And the example he gives of astrology, and he says astrology is more guesswork than it is a science. But one of the things that he says is that the problem with astrology, he said, is that people actually think these planets have influence. And he said he likens them to a person like an ant. He said, imagine an ant who's been given knowledge, and it's on a piece of paper, and it sees a pen, and the pen is writing. The ant, looking at the ink appearing on the paper, will think that the pen is the one that's causing that. Because it can't see the hand holding the pen. It's too small. And then it can't see the arm behind the hand. And then it can't see the man behind the arm. And then it can't see the brain behind the movement. And then it can't see the will inside that's compelling it. He said, like that is the human being when it looks at the asbab and thinks that the means outside of the world are what are dictating things. He said, people think when the sun comes up, the light shines, because they don't understand that it's Allah who's illuminating everything. He's only using this as a means in the same way. And this is the limitation of human beings. And then he talks about the sciences whose names have been changed. And this is an important aspect of this, because he says fiqh was understanding and it became jurisprudence. So he talks about the limitation of it. And then ilm, which was knowledge, he said becomes the knowledge of argumentation, disputation. And then tawheed, which was seeing Allah in His creation. And the asbab being simply the musabbib, or the means behind, the reality behind the means, which is real tawheed. He said it's reduced to this. And then tadhkir, which is reminding people and exhorting people, he said become like stories. And then wisdom, hikmah, becomes philosophy, because it became used in Arabic for philosophy. So he argues that we need a restoration of these proper technical terms. And then he goes on to say, like for instance, he gives a definition of tawheed, which is very beautiful. He said theology at the time of the Salaf was a belief that all things come from God, a belief which ruled out all intermediary causes, asbab wal wasa'il. Both good and evil would be seen as coming from God. And the fruits of this is dependence, tawakkul. And that's why he puts the two together later on. And he said, but now it's become like a precious fruit encased in two successive husks. And then he talks about the dhikr and how that has been completely altered. And he says how the early scholars warned of the storytellers. There's people who come into mosques and they tell stories. Imam Malik actually prohibited them in the mosques of Medina because he didn't feel it was appropriate. And there's a famous story of Al-A'mash, one of the great muhaddithin. He was in a mosque once and he heard a man giving he was a qas. And he says, and I heard from Al-A'mash. And Al-A'mash knew that he never gave him any knowledge. So he went into the center of the masjid and started picking out his underarm hairs. And the khatib said, Ya Rajul, la tastahi, aren't you ashamed to do something like that in the masjid? He said, why? This is the sunnah. And what you're doing is haram. You're telling lies. I'm Al-A'mash. So he said this is a problem, is that these storytellers will do anything, like a comedian who will do anything to get a laugh. These storytellers will do anything to get a tear. So they use this technique of learning how to move people's emotions and sway their emotions. And he says that that's not something from the Salaf. And then he talks about some of the Sufiya and the shatahat. He goes into that, about the problems with that. And then he gives you how to determining how much is praiseworthy from a science. So he says some sciences you should learn to the extent of it. Like this, he said knowledge of God is endless. You can keep going. To not theoretical knowledge, but he's talking about experiential knowledge. But he says that learning too much of fiqh, where you go into all the khilafat, he said you waste your life. Learning too much of grammar is a waste of time. He's saying that take from these what you need and then move on. Don't waste your life in these things, because life is too precious. He said it's the single most precious thing that you have is your time, and how you spend it determines everything. And then he talks about people, scholars, and he said that therefore those who pursue branches of knowledge whose acquisition is fard kifaya, especially when they have already have been taken up by some, and they pursue these things, and they argue that it's important to study these things. He said these people are like somebody who snakes and scorpions have crept under their clothes and they begin to whisk flies off somebody else. Like he's saying they should be preoccupied with their own self. But they'll argue that, no, I'm learning this to preserve this knowledge so we can teach it and this and that. So he said they forget themselves. And he warns about this. And then he talks in the end of that section, he says that a certain sheikh, and it's said that it's Imam al-Junaid, was asked about all the sciences he learned, and he said, he opened his hand and blew like that, and he said, they're all haba'an manthura. He said, the only thing that benefited me was prayers that I used to pray in the middle of the night. So he's saying that, look, this is real. You can learn all these things, but in the end, what are you doing to save your soul? And then in the section 4, that he talks about the why people seek polemics. And it's very interesting, his argument, because what he says is in the early period of Islam, scholars, everybody loved knowledge so much, and the scholars became desired by people, especially the rulers. So they would bring the rulers into their courts, and the rulers would do arguments. So you would see like Imam Shafi'i would argue in defense of this, that, or the other. Imam Malik, they would give him lots of money, the rulers, and they would bestow upon them. So other people saw this and they said, there's money to be made in this. And so they began seeking knowledge to get the power that these scholars had. And this is one of the things that the German philosopher Nietzsche says, that there's nothing more powerful than the saint. He has a power that is greater than kings, because he's the only free person. And freedom is the most dangerous thing in the world, which is why governments are so afraid of it. And so the early people were saints. They were awliya, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i. But the other people wanted their outward, like like Simon, who wanted the power that Peter had. And so what he says is they learn these tricks to get into the palaces, to get money. And this becomes a great calamity for Islam, because he said that this is what the ulama are all involved in now. He said the sincere ones are gone. And he said these mutarassimun will use as an excuse, we're only following the way of the Salaf. But he's saying they're liars. This is not the way of the Salaf. And then he will tell you who the Salaf were. But he talks about the effect that debating has on the heart. And he gives these qualities of the debaters and how they justify their debates. And first he tells you that there's good, that we need this argument, munadhara. You need to have this to pursue the truth. But then he says, what are the evils that come from this? And he talks about envy, because he said debaters envy people that are better than them. And then he talks about pride, kibr, because, oh, did you see that? I really showed him. Did you see when he said that and I said this? And so they get pride. And then he says they also get hiqd, resentment, if they lose. And then they backbite, because they'll speak about them afterwards. He was so stupid. Did you hear that one argument he made? Unbelievable. And then self-justification, right? He'll start claiming tazkiyah, la tuzakku anfusakum. And each one will claim that he's doing it for high and exalted reasons. And the reason why this is so powerful from Imam al-Ghazali is because he is that man. He knew. He's saying, look, I did this. I know it. And I'm telling you the truth.